The moment Director James Caldwell told me I wasn't strategic enough for the leadership meeting, I knew my time at Orangewood Enterprises had reached a crossroads. His smirk lingered in the conference room doorway as he delivered the blow, watching for my reaction with the satisfaction of someone who believed they'd just eliminated a threat. I simply nodded, gathered my portfolio, and stepped aside. What he didn't anticipate was the board meeting 5 days later. I'm Diana Markson, and for 3 years I'd been climbing the ranks at Orangewood, a mid-sized consulting firm specializing in organizational restructuring. My track record spoke volumes: client retention rates that consistently exceeded company benchmarks, revenue growth in my division that outpaced every other department, and a reputation for solving problems that others deemed impossible. Yet somehow, in Caldwell's calculus, I lacked strategic vision. The irony wasn't lost on me. Strategic thinking had been my lifeline since childhood, when my single mother worked double shifts and left me to navigate homework, household management, and my younger brother's needs. Strategy wasn't an abstract concept, it was survival, adaptation, the art of seeing 3 moves ahead when everyone else was stuck on the current play. But corporate politics operated by different rules, and Caldwell had mastered them with the precision of a chess grandmaster. He'd arrived 6 months earlier as the new director of operations, armed with an MBA from a prestigious program and connections that opened doors I didn't even know existed. His appointment had been swift, decisive, and accompanied by whispers about his previous successes at larger firms. His reputation was that of a rainmaker, someone who could cut costs, drive efficiency, and impress senior leadership with flashy metrics. The leadership meeting he'd excluded me from was crucial, Orangewood's quarterly strategic planning session where department heads would discuss upcoming initiatives, budget allocations, and personnel decisions that would shape the company's trajectory for the next fiscal quarter. Missing it meant losing voice in decisions that directly affected my team and our projects. As I walked back to my office that Tuesday afternoon, I could feel the weight of curious glances from colleagues who'd witnessed the exchange. Some offered sympathetic looks, others quickly averted their eyes, unwilling to be associated with someone who'd apparently fallen from grace. The corporate ecosystem had its own brutal efficiency: align with the winners, distance yourself from the losers. My assistant, Patricia, looked up as I entered. She'd been with the company for 15 years and possessed an institutional knowledge that made her invaluable. Her expression told me she'd already heard the news through the office grapevine that moved faster than any official communication channel. The Henderson Industries presentation is ready for Thursday, she said quietly, her tone carefully neutral. All the materials are compiled and the projections look strong. Henderson Industries. Our biggest potential client acquisition in 2 years, worth approximately $2.3 million in annual revenue if we secured the contract. I'd been cultivating this relationship for 8 months, attending industry conferences, building rapport with their executive team, and developing a customized approach that addressed their specific operational challenges. Henderson's COO, Victoria Chen, valued authenticity, and I'd made sure every interaction carried substance, not just polish. But now, with my exclusion from strategic planning, would I even be permitted to lead the presentation? That week became an exercise in discipline. I kept my face composed in hallways, my tone measured in meetings, even as my mind cycled through possible scenarios. Was Caldwell positioning himself to take over Henderson? If so, he'd find himself woefully underprepared. He was sharp, yes, but transactional. He didn't understand the nuances of Henderson's organizational culture the way I did. By Wednesday, whispers had intensified. 2 managers from marketing, chatting near the coffee machine, went silent when I entered. A junior consultant, bright, ambitious, asked whether he should postpone delivering a report until the dust settled. Clearly, Caldwell's maneuver had sent ripples through the firm. Thursday brought unexpected developments. Around mid-morning, Patricia knocked on my office door with an unusual expression, part confusion, part excitement. "Diana, the board secretary just called. They want you in the boardroom in 20 minutes. The boardroom occupied the top floor of our building, a space I'd visited only twice during my tenure at Orangewood. Both previous occasions had been for company-wide announcements, once for the acquisition of a smaller competitor, and another time for the introduction of new senior executives. Individual summons were rare and typically signified either exceptional recognition or serious disciplinary action. I gathered my standard materials, current project summaries, quarterly performance metrics, and the Henderson Industries proposal, uncertain which direction this meeting might take. The elevator ride seemed longer than usual, each floor passing with deliberate slowness as I mentally prepared for various scenarios. My palms were dry, but my thoughts were sharp. The boardroom's heavy oak doors opened to reveal 5 figures seated around the polished conference table: Chairman William Peterson, CFO Margaret Lawson, 2 external board members whose names I recognized from company literature, and surprisingly, no sign of Director Caldwell. Chairman Peterson gestured toward an empty chair. "Diana, please join us. We have several questions about your recent work and some upcoming opportunities." For the next 45 minutes, they grilled me with questions that demonstrated remarkable familiarity with my projects, methodologies, and client relationships. They inquired about the Henderson Industries opportunity with specificity that suggested they'd reviewed my materials in detail. They asked about my vision for expanding our services into adjacent markets, my assessment of current operational inefficiencies, and my recommendations for improving cross-departmental collaboration. Most surprising were their questions about leadership philosophy and strategic planning approaches, the very areas Caldwell had deemed my weaknesses. I spoke with the same clarity I'd honed in countless client meetings, balancing candor with diplomacy. When Lawson pressed me on cost structures, I outlined not just numbers but the reasoning behind my projections. When Peterson asked how I handled internal conflict, I told him about a project last year where I'd mediated between finance and operations, salvaging both the budget and the client relationship. As the meeting concluded, Chairman Peterson leaned forward slightly. "Diana, we appreciate your time and insight. We'll be in touch within the next few days regarding some potential changes in our organizational structure." Walking back to my office, I felt a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. The board's questions had been probing but respectful, suggesting they viewed me as a valuable asset rather than a problem to be addressed. Yet Caldwell's recent actions created an atmosphere of instability that made every interaction feel charged with unspoken tensions. Friday afternoon brought clarity in the most dramatic fashion possible. I was reviewing quarterly budget projections when my office door burst open. Director Caldwell stormed in, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. Behind him, Patricia hovered uncertainly, clearly having failed to announce his arrival or prevent his abrupt entrance. "Why did the board ask for you by name?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the office space and drawing attention from nearby cubicles. The question hung in the air like a challenge. His composure, typically maintained with corporate precision, had cracked completely. The smirk from 5 days earlier had been replaced by something approaching desperation. I set down my pen and looked at him directly. "I'm not sure what you mean, James. Don't play games with me, Diana. I just came from a meeting with Chairman Peterson. They're restructuring my entire department and specifically requested you take over the Henderson presentation. They asked about your strategic initiatives, your leadership capabilities, your vision for the division." The pieces began assembling themselves into a coherent picture. The board hadn't summoned me for discipline or routine evaluation. They'd been conducting their own assessment of leadership capabilities within the organization. Caldwell's exclusion of me from strategic planning had apparently backfired spectacularly. "The board makes their own decisions," I replied calmly. "I assume they're focused on what's best for Orangewood's future." His anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by something approaching confusion. "But you didn't even argue when I removed you from the meeting. You just stepped aside." There it was, the fundamental miscalculation that had led to this moment. Caldwell had interpreted my lack of immediate confrontation as weakness, when in reality it had been strategic patience. I'd learned long ago that some battles are won by not fighting them directly. "Sometimes the most strategic move is knowing when not to engage," I said. "Forcing confrontation rarely produces the outcomes you actually want." He stared at me for several seconds, perhaps recognizing that his assessment of my capabilities had been profoundly flawed. The corporate game he thought he'd mastered had additional layers he hadn't considered. After he left, I sat in my office processing the implications of this exchange. Within hours, official communications would likely formalize whatever organizational changes the board had decided upon. The Henderson presentation would proceed under my leadership, and my role within Orangewood would shift significantly. But beyond the immediate professional vindication, this experience had taught me something valuable about strategic thinking in corporate environments. True strategy isn't always about immediate action or visible maneuvering. Sometimes it's about positioning yourself for opportunities that haven't yet materialized, maintaining competence and relationships while others focus on short-term political gains. The following Monday, Chairman Peterson announced a restructuring that elevated me to Senior Director of Strategic Operations, with expanded responsibilities for client development and cross-departmental initiatives. Director Caldwell received a lateral transfer to a different division, his authority significantly reduced. The Henderson Industries presentation went flawlessly, exceeding expectations that had been elevated by months of preparation and the dramatic circumstances surrounding the leadership transition. Victoria Chen and her executive team responded enthusiastically to our strategic recommendations, implementation timeline, and innovative approaches to operational challenges that differentiated our proposal from competitors who had focused on conventional solutions. We secured the contract with terms that included performance bonuses tied to measurable improvements in efficiency metrics, additional phases for expanding our engagement into subsidiary operations, and referral opportunities within Henderson's professional network that could generate millions in future revenue. The success validated the board's confidence in my strategic capabilities and provided foundation for expanded consulting operations. More importantly, the Henderson engagement became a case study in strategic relationship management that attracted attention from other major corporations seeking similar consulting partnerships. Within 6 months, we had proposals pending with 4 additional Fortune 500 companies, including 2 international organizations that would establish Orangewood's presence in European markets. The success also demonstrated to our team members that organizational changes could create opportunities rather than threats when managed professionally and strategically. Michael, Catherine, Alex, and other team members received promotions and expanded responsibilities that reflected our department's elevated status and increased project portfolio. Their initial concerns about stability transformed into excitement about career advancement possibilities. Yet I found myself reflecting on the complexity of corporate dynamics and the dangers of underestimating colleagues based on surface-level observations. Caldwell's mistake hadn't been ambition or political maneuvering, it had been assuming that strategic thinking always manifests in obvious, confrontational ways. As for my own strategic evolution, this experience reinforced lessons I'd been learning gradually throughout my career. Sometimes the most powerful response to exclusion is demonstrating irreplaceable value through consistent performance. Sometimes stepping aside creates space for others to reveal their limitations while you maintain your position of strength. The corporate world will always reward genuine competence eventually, even when short-term politics temporarily obscure merit. But patience, professionalism, and strategic thinking remain essential tools for navigating systems where perception and reality don't always align immediately. The months that followed brought opportunities one hadn't anticipated and challenges that tested every lesson I'd learned about corporate strategy and interpersonal dynamics. The Henderson Industries contract became the foundation for a consulting practice that expanded into 3 new industry sectors within 18 months. Our success attracted attention from competitors who attempted to recruit key team members, from clients who referred us to their industry contacts, and from business publications that featured our innovative approaches in case studies and best practices articles. Managing growth required skills I hadn't fully developed, hiring and training new consultants, establishing quality control systems that maintained our standards across multiple simultaneous projects, and developing operational frameworks that could scale without losing the personal attention that had made us successful with smaller client engagements. The relationship with Caldwell evolved into something resembling professional respect, though trust remained elusive. His transfer to a different division removed the immediate conflict, but observing his subsequent career trajectory provided ongoing lessons about the difference between short-term political maneuvering and sustainable professional success. He struggled to replicate his initial influence in his new role, suggesting that his strengths were more situational than transferable. More significantly, the entire experience taught me to recognize the subtle signs of organizational dynamics that operate beneath official structures and formal hierarchies. Board members, senior executives, and influential clients often conduct their own evaluations of rising talent, assessments that can override immediate supervisors' opinions when strategic decisions demand different perspectives. Patricia retired 6 months later, but not before sharing insights about corporate politics that she'd accumulated over 15 years of observing executive transitions, power struggles, and the various ways that competent professionals either advanced or stagnated based on their understanding of organizational realities. Her institutional knowledge became a framework for navigating future challenges with greater strategic awareness. Looking forward, I carry these insights into my expanded role, remembering that leadership isn't just about commanding rooms or winning immediate battles, it's about building sustainable value that speaks for itself when the stakes matter most. The corporate world rewards patience and competence, but only when combined with strategic thinking that recognizes opportunities others might miss and positions oneself to capitalize on them when timing aligns with preparation. In the weeks following the Henderson win, the office carried a subtle but unmistakable shift in atmosphere. Conversations paused when I walked by, then picked up again with a slightly different timbre, more respectful, more cautious. The same colleagues who'd once looked away after Caldwell's exclusion now sought me out in the break room, eager to align themselves with the department's new momentum. I didn't blame them. In consulting, reputation traveled faster than policy memos, and people sensed when the balance of power was changing. But I never forgot who had met my gaze with quiet support in that hallway 5 days before the board meeting, and who had turned away. Loyalty in a corporate environment was often transactional, but I cataloged the differences anyway. Caldwell, meanwhile, remained a looming presence. His new division was technically lateral but carried nowhere near the influence he'd once wielded. He still had an office on the executive floor, but I noticed the subtle changes. His once bustling corridor grew quieter, the parade of ambitious managers seeking his favor dwindled, and the tone of his emails to me shifted from curt authority to something closer to forced collegiality. One Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into my new role, I caught him outside the building, standing alone near the fountain with his phone pressed tightly to his ear. His voice was low, but his posture betrayed agitation, clenched jaw, rigid shoulders. When he noticed me exiting, he straightened abruptly, pasted on a smile, and ended the call mid-sentence. "Congratulations again on Henderson," he said, voice smooth but eyes cold. "Impressive work." I thanked him politely, but the moment lingered. The smile had cracked just enough to reveal the resentment beneath. I knew better than to underestimate him. People like Caldwell didn't fade quietly, they plotted their return in shadows, waiting for the right misstep to exploit. The board, for their part, had no intention of letting Henderson be an isolated triumph. At the next quarterly review, Chairman Peterson pushed me to outline a 3-year vision for expanding Orangewood's consulting practice into international markets. It wasn't a request, it was a directive. I spent long nights sketching frameworks, balancing ambition with pragmatism. Expansion into Europe sounded glamorous in the annual report, but I knew the operational grind behind the curtain: compliance regulations, talent acquisition in foreign markets, cultural nuances in business etiquette. I worked with Catherine and Alex on building pilot models, running scenarios that simulated staffing and profitability under different exchange rates. By the time I presented to the board, our recommendations were fortified by data, not just rhetoric. Still, every victory carried weight. Growth meant hiring, and hiring meant risk. New consultants arrived eager and bright-eyed, but scaling a team threatened the culture we'd built, the sense that every member's contribution mattered. I reminded myself constantly that strategy wasn't just external, it was internal too. Retaining the loyalty of people who'd taken risks with me during the Caldwell fallout was just as important as securing the next multimillion-dollar contract. And Caldwell, he was watching. One evening, Patricia, still a month away from retirement, leaned against my doorway, a stack of old project binders in her arms. She set them down with a sigh, then glanced around to make sure we were alone. "You should know," she said, lowering her voice, "James has been meeting offsite with a few senior managers. Lunches, quiet dinners. Nothing overt, but it's happening often enough to raise eyebrows." I nodded slowly, my pulse quickening. The corporate chessboard never stayed static for long. If Caldwell was building alliances, it meant he was positioning himself for a countermove. "What do you think he's after?" I asked. Patricia gave me the faintest of smiles. "Men like Caldwell only want 2 things, redemption or revenge. Sometimes both." Her words echoed in my head for days. The real test came sooner than expected. 6 weeks after Henderson signed, Orangewood was shortlisted for a government modernization contract, an opportunity worth nearly $5 million annually, with long-term political visibility. Our proposal had to clear multiple layers of compliance, risk assessment, and technical integration. It wasn't just a project, it was a statement about our firm's capacity to play at a national level. The board placed me in charge of the pitch, but I wasn't naive. A contract of that size attracted competition not just from other firms, but from inside our own ranks. Departments jockeyed for influence, hoping to claim pieces of the spotlight. It didn't surprise me when Caldwell resurfaced with a support plan for the project, unsolicited, of course, packed with recommendations that conveniently shifted visibility back to his division. The first time I read his memo, I felt a flicker of irritation. The second time, I recognized his true intent, not to improve the proposal, but to dilute ownership of the win. If Orangewood secured the contract, he wanted his fingerprints on it, however faint. Rather than confront him, I did what had served me well before. I documented his contributions, incorporated the pieces that genuinely added value, and made sure every board member could clearly distinguish between his supplemental suggestions and the core strategy my team had developed. No drama, no confrontation, just a transparent trail of competence that spoke for itself. When the government awarded us the contract, the official press release mentioned my department by name. Caldwell's memo went unacknowledged. His smile in the hallway afterward was brittle, the kind that barely conceals rage. That night, I returned home late and poured a glass of wine, staring out my apartment window at the city lights. For the first time, I admitted to myself that this wasn't just about career advancement anymore. It was about survival in a corporate ecosystem where enemies didn't announce themselves with open hostility. They eroded your footing quietly, waiting for you to stumble. Patricia retired the following week, leaving me with a handwritten note tucked into one of her old binders. Remember, Diana, strategy is rarely about the move itself. It's about making sure you're still standing when others fall. Her absence left a quiet gap in the office, but her words became my compass. I couldn't control Caldwell's ambitions, or the board's shifting agendas, or the currents of office gossip. What I could control was the value I created, the relationships I nurtured, and the clarity of vision I carried into every decision. The months that followed were a blur of travel, client negotiations, and late-night strategy sessions. Henderson blossomed into a flagship engagement, the government contract elevated our profile nationally, and whispers about international expansion grew louder with every board meeting. I became the face of Orangewood in industry circles, quoted in trade publications, invited to keynote panels where Caldwell's name was never mentioned. And yet, I never forgot the look in his eyes that day by the fountain, the promise of unfinished business.